Hello, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. My name is Melanie. This is Adventures in Hostessville, and welcome to episode 13 of the Vintage Magazine Project. And this is the first episode of the April 1913 Modern Priscilla. Ba-da-bum, ba-dum-bum, bum, ba-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. All right, so this magazine is about fancy work and everyday housekeeping, it says. But the article I want to take a look at today is called Everyday Uses for Crackers. So really it is just a bunch of recipes that use cracker crumbs, but it's not written as recipes, it's written as this little story. Whatever are you doing? Half-asked, half-exclaimed my friend Mrs. Stewart, who was privileged to pop unannounced into my kitchen, as she now did. Rolling crackers for the best dessert ever made, I responded, without more formal greeting than she had bestowed on me. And what is that? She persisted. Sit down and you shall see. I call it Danish apple cake, but I may as well call it Swedish or Norwegian, for my maids of all nationalities know it. Whatever you please to call it, however, it is fine. So I am going to start by rolling some cracker crumbs to make this cake. So here's a thing that I just learned. Saltine is not a brand name. Could have knocked me over with a feather. Apparently it's just an actual kind of crackers. And Premium, here is the brand name. I probably should have known that because it's enormous, but I always just thought it was a descriptor. So there's a ton of ads in this magazine for stuff like premium crackers, or in this case, we've got Sunshine specialty biscuits. There's, you can get free delivery on your 5-pound box of marshmallows. Good Lord. How big is a 5-pound box of marshmallows? And on the page before this article, there's an ad for something called Sapolio, which I guess is soap, but it's got these funny little cartoon characters, and apparently it's a series. They live in Spotless Town. The thing that I think is the most interesting about it is that it really just makes it clear how top of everybody's thought process the suffrage movement is at this point. So this magazine comes out in April of 1913, but in March of 1913, there has been a march in Washington. It's the day before Woodrow Wilson is inaugurated. And there are thousands and thousands of women out there. The march is organized by Lucy Burns and Alice Paul. And Alice Paul, of course, is a big fan of and follower of the British suffragette, Emmeline Pankhurst. In April of 1913, Emmeline Pankhurst isn't eating anything because she's in jail on a hunger strike. Okay, I've got my 2.5 cups of cracker crumbs. Now the next thing that I need to do is make some applesauce. You see, I have a nice large bowl of applesauce. I stew the apples in as little water as possible, just a 1/2 cup or a cup of water, keeping the applesauce fairly dry. So that means that I'm gonna have to make it from scratch. Okay, so the hunger strike. This has gotten to be a really common sort of method of resistance from the British suffragettes. So the suffragettes are technically in England known as the Women's Social and Political Union. And suffragette actually sort of started as a demeaning name from people that didn't approve. The et part being like, oh, you want suffrage, aren't you so cute with your little votes for women? And then the suffragettes were basically like, we're reclaiming that, and we're also gonna be setting stuff on fire and throwing some bombs. So back off. So because of their sort of militant tactics, they have been ending up in jail a fair amount. And going on this hunger strike is a way to get sympathy from the public, and it works because the public doesn't want to see these women starving in jail. So law enforcement decides that they will force feed the women. Force feeding is awful. It certainly doesn't sway the public sympathy back towards law enforcement. So in 1913, Parliament passes an act called the Prisoners' Temporary Discharge for Ill Health Act, which comes to be known by the nickname the Cat and Mouse Act. And the idea is that then they'll be able to say, okay, well, you're starving yourself. We're going to send you home because you're in ill health. If you decide to keep with your hunger strike, that's not our fault. And then once you're better and you start eating again, we can pick you up again. This doesn't really make the public happy either. People felt like basically they are treating these women like a cat playing with a mouse and just like batting it around a couple of times. The other problem with the Cat and Mouse Act is that they have a really hard time actually recapturing some of these women, because by this point, the Women's Social and Political Union has created this 30-member all-female bodyguard who are trained in Jujitsu. When it is done, I add a half a cup of grape juice. That gives added flavor and richness and a delightful color. I usually make 2 at a time. We are so fond of them. You see, I have a 2-quart melon mold, well buttered. Okay, the applesauce is all cooked up. I don't have a melon mold, I don't think. I don't know what it is. I'm gonna use this other mold that I have that has lots of little ridges for things to get caught in, because I like to set myself up for failure. Okay, so Edith Garrud is the woman that teaches the suffragettes jujitsu. And Edith is born in Bath, in England, in I think 1872. And she meets William Garrett, and they are both physical culturists. If you remember from the Bernard McFadden episode, that's this sort of like subculture of exercise enthusiasts. They're getting started maybe like 10 years after he does. So they get married and they move to London because he gets a job as a trainer for a university. He teaches gymnastics and wrestling and boxing. And they end up taking a class from this guy, Edward Barton-Wright. And Barton-Wright has a gym of his own, and he has invented this mixed martial art. And it's a combination of, obviously, jujitsu, but then also that sort of like men's bare-knuckled, like gentleman boxing that you see pictures where they're all so like. And then also stick fighting is a thing that he is interested in because it transfers itself really well to a walking stick or an umbrella. Like, it's the most British thing ever. And if you're like, wait, this sounds familiar, didn't Sherlock Holmes? Yes. Arthur Conan Doyle uses Bartitsu in one of his stories. He calls it Baritsu and not Bartitsu, which is like a weird misspelling, but whatever, he also believed in fairies. But the problem is that Barton-Wright, he's not a very good businessman, and his gym folds. So they end up learning actual jujitsu from this guy, Sadakazu Uenishi. He had been teaching at Barton-Wright's gym, but he had, for some time now, already had his own gym in London. So they go study with him. He is sort of the first guy to really teach jujitsu publicly outside of Japan. So they're studying with him, and it must go well because a few years after that, Uenishi decides to go back to Japan, and William Garrett takes over his dojo there in London. So they are now the jujitsu pair. He owns this studio. She is teaching the women's and children's classes, which it's presented as, and rightly so, a really good method of self-defense for women and children because it doesn't really depend on your strength as much as your ability to use your opponent's power and strength against them, which is especially great for Edith because I don't know if I mentioned this, she's 4'11". They're also writing magazine articles about jujitsu. She is doing some fight choreography for plays. She ends up in a movie that's apparently the first martial arts movie made in Britain. And then again, much like Bernard McFadden and his wife, these two are going around doing these assemblies and demonstrations, and William will talk about jujitsu and she will demonstrate, which looks great because she's in this bright red coat with her full-length skirt and her hat, just dressed like just regular, out for the regular day. Now watch me flip this guy. So they get hired to give a presentation to the Women's Social and Political Union. But the night comes around that they're supposed to do it, and William is sick, like can't go on stage. Sick. So Emmeline Pankhurst, she says to Edith, she's like, you can do it. You don't need him. You can do the talking and you can do the demonstrating. And she does, and that sort of begins her tenure as the bodyguard trainer of the suffragette movement. Now it is to be baked in a moderately brisk oven, I said, trying the oven by holding my hand inside, lowering the gas a bit, and setting my 2 cakes securely on the grate. And do you serve it hot? Asked Mrs. Stewart. You can if you wish, I replied, but I usually tip the cakes from the mold as soon as they come out of the oven and let them get thoroughly chilled. Okay, I don't know. I have already expressed that I am not certain that I think this is going to come out of the pan. This doesn't feel solid in any way. I don't know. Oh, well, that's one thing that happens is that crumbs go everywhere. This is very hot. Oh, hold on. It's hot. I can't do it. Okay. All right. I mean, it's got a little bit of a like raw ham look to it, but it came out of the pan. It did. Okay. And she says to decorate it with whipped cream anyway, and that's probably why, because then it will look less like raw ham. I'm going to put this in the fridge until it is chilled, and then we will return to the end of the story about Edith Garrud. But one good turn deserves another, I said. You were talking about crackers with Mrs. Lewiston, you say. Perhaps you have been experimenting again. You might be surprised, she answered, laughing. I have been experimenting indeed, and what do you think I have found out? Mercy me, do tell, I encouraged. So, Edith Garrett starts teaching this suffragettes only self-defense class. Not only does she teach them jujitsu, she also teaches them Indian clubs, which if you see those old-timey pictures of people with exercising with it, looks like a big bowling pin, wooden bowling pin, that's an Indian club. But they also make a really good club because you can hide it underneath your skirt. And these women are also making like armor for themselves underneath their clothes out of cardboard and newspaper and cotton. But Edith is aware that just trying to physically overpower the police force is maybe not the best idea. And so not only are they using this physical stuff, they are also doing a lot of disguises and decoys and subterfuge and misdirection and all of this other stuff. And it becomes its own kind of mixed martial art that the newspapers name Suffrajitsu. But they have a couple of really big run-ins. Like in 1914, there's this meeting in Glasgow that Emmeline Pankhurst is going to be at, and the second she comes out, you know, in her sash and her veil and everything, the cops rush the stage. And when they do, they discover that all these pretty little flower garlands that have been hung up are actually covering barbed wire. And the women just leap at it. And so like 4,000 people are sitting in the audience watching all these suffragettes and all of these cops go at it. And when the dust sort of finally clears, they do grab Emmeline Pankhurst, but it's not her, because in the fracas, some other woman has put on the veil and Emmeline Pankhurst has disappeared into the night. And you know, it's sort of easy now to feel like, yeah, you go, ladies. But it's important, I think, to remember that at the time, like a lot of people didn't think women should have the right to vote and shouldn't be doing any of this stuff. A lot of women thought that. A lot of women think that now, that we are second-class citizens and should let men be the head of the household. Give you one guess how I feel about that. You know, it doesn't look pretty, but it looks really close to the picture in the magazine. I don't know, let's try it. Okay, here we go. Danish apple cake made with soda crackers. It's all right. It's all right. It's not leaping immediately to the top of recipes of the month, but it is way better than the nut loaf was. Thank you so much for joining me, everybody. If you could, hit like and subscribe here on YouTube. You can also follow me on Facebook and Instagram. I've always got additional information about the episode there. And if you'd like to support the show, you can subscribe at patreon.com. One of the options on there is a Recipe of the Month Club. I don't know that this is going to be part of it, but we'll find out. Thanks a lot and have a great day. Crumbs, butter,